Her true story from Massachusetts. My daughter sent me packing. Her husband didn't want an extra mouth. So I bought their apartment complex and doubled the rent. They thought I was powerless. I made them pay more than just rent. I stood at the front door, my arms wrapped tightly around the handle of my suitcase that I had packed only minutes ago, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. The sky outside was overcast, gray clouds rumbling with distant thunder, as if to mock the turmoil churning within me. My daughter's voice cut through the heavy silence like broken glass. No more allowance to support you, Mom. No more free meals. No more emotional baggage. If you can't pay your way, you can just leave. She spat the words as if each one had been polished to sting. Her voice teetered between icy contempt and hollow finality. Standing a few steps behind her was my son-in-law, his posture stiff, jaw set. We don't need the entanglement. We don't need another mouth to feed under our roof. We're done. The dismissal of 2 generations echoed around me, relentless and exact. I clutched the suitcase tighter. I had never heard cruelty like this from my own flesh and blood before. Shaking, I swallowed against the sudden lump in my throat. I blinked back tears, swallowed again to steady myself and force dignity into my voice. I didn't want to cry in front of them. I wanted to be strong, even if I felt like a shrinking shadow. In that moment, the suitcase became my shield and my defiance. I took in their faces. My daughter's eyes were cold, without hesitation or sorrow. My son-in-law shifted, avoiding even a glance in my direction. I couldn't find anything in them that made me feel loved in that instant, only rejection. And yet, even as they delivered that dismissal, bells tolled inside me louder than their words. I had poured my life into that home, saved, sacrificed, and supported. Hadn't I helped cover their mortgage when my son-in-law lost his job? Hadn't I covered the taxes on the building and put money in the maintenance fund every year? All of it, they dismissed as if I had no claim to even step foot inside their front door. My hand trembled on the suitcase handle. The air felt cold, each inhale like a rebuke. My daughter folded her arms and lifted her chin, as though she had already cast me aside. My son-in-law nodded in agreement. The room had become too small, shrinking around me. So I stepped back and allowed the door to close gently behind me, though inside I was anything but gentle. The cool hall echoed with the click of my suitcase wheels and my heart's pounding thud. My tears came at last, silent and warm, trailing down my cheeks as I rounded the corner. I breathed in the stale air of the hallway, smelling their memories, our birthdays, holiday meals, seasonal decorations still tucked away in the basement, and I carried those memories with me, fresh and unforgotten, even as I walked away. Outside, a single raindrop hit my cheek as I opened the door to the world again. The skies opened up, the rain turning into a steady curtain. It felt fitting, my tears joining the storm, carrying me forward, away from rejection but towards something more. Something I couldn't name yet. I walked until the rain soaked me through, but I did not stop. I didn't look back. I let each step fill me with determination, a slow burn that set my spine straight and lifted the weight from my chest. They thought they could remove me, erase me like a line in the sand. But that would be their mistake. In the echo of their words, my mind flickered back to joyful times. The first day they invited me in, the soft laughter we shared around the dinner table, the hopeful days I thought we'd grow old together. I remembered the trusting smile of my daughter when I held her newborn, the way she hugged me tight and said, "Mom, I want you near me forever, old or young." Back then, I believed I belonged. Their words may have tried to erase that belief, but I knew better. My resolve formed like a phoenix rising from ashes. I would not be erased. I would not be defined by their final dismissal. I may have walked out with tears and a suitcase, but inside I carried something more powerful than our shared addresses, stronger than their cold control. I had the capacity to respond, and in that response was authority. Even if they considered me powerless, they had made a mistake. They presumed I had lost control over my life, but if they believed I was helpless, they didn't know me at all. I would show them, in my own way, that I still had a voice and resources. I still had pride. I still had power. I paused on the wet pavement, phone in hand, suitcase by my side. I sent a quick text to an old friend in real estate. "Let's meet." My fingers trembled, but the action was deliberate, decisive. I still had rights. I still had options. I still had control. They could send me packing, but the world outside their door belonged to me too. I stood in the rain, suitcase at my feet, heart pounding with the clarity of purpose. You thought I was powerless, I whispered into the storm, but not anymore. I trudged down the sidewalk as cold raindrops pelted my coat. The suitcase wheels squeaked against the wet pavement, echoing like distant footsteps in the empty suburb. Streetlights cast muted pools of yellow as I passed familiar fences and flowering bushes, the scent of wet earth rising around me. With every step I felt lighter until the gravity of loss dropped into my chest, heavier than the soaked coat against my shoulder. Memories surfaced unbidden. The first time I diaper-bagged my newborn daughter, inexperienced but determined. The countless nights I cradled her as she learned her ABCs beneath a dim lamp. The toddler days when I laid out her clothes and packed her lunches full of colorful fruits, each slice a silent promise that she mattered. I remembered each scraped knee kiss, each triumphant school recital, each heart-to-heart in the kitchen scenting of cookie dough. I remembered her childhood bedrooms transformed for each holiday season, and how she always insisted on including me. Then came my grandchildren, two little sparks who sprouted from the years I thought might quieten my world. I braided their hair, taught them how to skip stones, repaired scraped elbows with antiseptic and bandages. We laughed together over bedtime stories, and I watched them grow, step by step, into bright young souls. I paid the property taxes for that house and pressed my hands into the grout I helped repair in the bathroom after a pipe leak. I recalled reading them stories during snowstorms, knowing the warmth of family had nothing to do with the thermostat. I recalled the holiday dinners I labored over, roast turkey, mashed potatoes, tender pies served with pride and love. I recalled the way my daughter looked at me from across the table as she raised her glass, whispering, "Thank you, Mom, for everything." And now, none of it seemed to matter. My name had vanished from their lives like mist. No one called me anymore except to ask when I'd pack my bags. No one invited me to family movie nights or birthday dinners unless I sucked it up and asked, or simply showed up unwanted. Mail with my name still arrived in the mailbox, but no longer held invitations, just flyers for services I couldn't pay, or leftover takeout menus from places they no longer dined. It felt like ghosts lived in their memories, and I was the only ghost left. As the rain soaked through my coat, I thought of their voices at the door. We don't need another mouth to feed. The sting wasn't just in their words, it was the casual cruelty in their tone, the ease with which they unmade me. I had been caretaker, friend, confidant, and overnight I became an inconvenience. I felt corroded from the inside, the ice of their rejection seeping into every corner of my beliefs. Had I misread every glance, every smile, every shared meal? My heart tightened. I swallowed down the shame, like a sour pill that wouldn't dissolve, and then I realized something troubling and true. I still had a name, belonging to a history richer than their narrow dismissal. I had identity. I had value. I had power, just not where they had expected it. I stopped beneath a streetlight dripping with moisture and stared at the droplets falling like beads of time. Their expression of disdain changed nothing in me except two things: awareness and intention. I could dwell in my heartbreak, or I could harness it. My tears were for the love I'd given, and it had not been wasted. I hunkered inside a phone booth and dialed the number of an old friend, Ben, a real estate consultant I'd met decades earlier at a community fundraiser. He didn't recognize my shaky voice at first, but as I spoke, reassurance crept into his tone. "Let's meet tomorrow," he said. "We'll look at that apartment complex on Oak Street." My hands slid from my coat pockets, trembling, but the fire started in my chest. I moved on after that. Rain slicked the roads, but I walked steadily, each footfall measured, no longer a retreat but a reclamation. Even as memory weighed heavy, I let the path forge a new one, a path toward possibility, not trepidation. I would not vanish. I would not accept erasure. I would not cower in shame. I would show them I was still here, and then I would show them exactly what I could do. Because if they believed I was powerless, they were wrong, terribly, profoundly wrong. They had sent me packing, but not out of power, out of misplaced self-assurance. I would turn their dismissal into my opportunity. and more than rent, I intended for them to pay attention. I arrived at the small real estate office just as the late morning sun filtered through the dusty blinds, casting narrow beams across old maps pinned to the walls. My coat was damp at the collar, but I didn't notice. I slipped inside, clutching my purse and the edge of hopes that had begun to stir. The familiar scent of stale coffee and printer ink greeted me, an odd comfort amid the turmoil of my day. "Marjorie?" A tall, silver-haired man looked up from his desk. His eyebrows lifted in surprise, then softened into a warm, knowing smile. "It's been years." I managed a small smile in return. "Too many, Henry. Thank you for seeing me." He gestured me to a chair. I sank into it, grateful for the support. Henry had been an old friend, an ambitious college graduate, brimming with ideas about housing development. I had helped him with early mentoring, sharing contacts, moral support, even a small loan to keep his fledgling consulting business afloat. I still remembered the victorious laughter over that first contract he signed with a local landlord, and I still knew he owed me more than a thank you. Now, as my eyes adjusted to the plastic potted plant in the corner and the screensaver of penthouses scrolling by, I took a breath and laid out my plan. "I know where my daughter lives," I began. I gestured toward the glossy brochure I'd tucked inside my folder. "It's an apartment complex on Oak Street, 30 units, built in the mid-90s. I've looked at the books. It's underpriced." Henry leaned back, studying me. "You want to buy it?" "I want to buy where she lives." My voice cracked as I repeated the hushed sentence. Not to punish her, but to remind her that I still have choices and rights, that I am not dependent on their good grace. He nodded slowly, his eyes sympathetic but curious. "Okay, let's walk through numbers." We spent the next 30 minutes poring over spreadsheets and loan options. Henry pulled out projections: purchase price, financing rates, projected rental income. My pulse raced as we examined risk versus reward. The apartment building needed updates, but with moderate investment, occupancy could rise and revenue follow. It was overwhelming. Legal forms, loans, assessments, a mountain of bureaucracy and math. But beneath it all, a spark of possibility shone brighter with each new document. Henry paused at one point, looking me in the eye. "You're doing the right thing. You're standing up, not just for yourself, but making a point." His encouragement felt like embers igniting a fire. I exhaled, took a sip of lukewarm coffee, then nodded. "I'm ready." Signing the pre-qualification documents made my hand tremble. I signed again. A stack of forms slid beneath my pen: credit applications, proof of income, the outline of a loan that would allow me to take ownership. My breath hitched as I tapped sign electronically. Henry slid the screen away and smiled. "Well done. I'll be in touch about inspection dates and bank meetings." I rose slowly, pressing my hand to the smooth wood of the desk. Emotion welled up in me: pride, fear, determination, satisfaction. I had taken the first step. As I gathered my folder, Henry handed me a manila envelope. "Here are copies of the documents. This is your path to ownership." I gripped the envelope, feeling the weight of paper and intention. It was a promise, a contract, not just with the bank, but with myself. I stepped outside into the midday glare, the sun warm against my damp coat. I paused at the curb, shifted the envelope under my arm, and smiled. Inside that envelope were options, accountability, and authority. They were what I had owed myself all along. I began walking, letting the sun dry my coat. In my chest, a slow drumbeat of resolve sounded steady and sure. Hope had found its roots. The turn I had taken, silent, unannounced, was begun, and before long it would become their surprise. I would hold the keys, literal and symbolic, to their sense of power. I folded the copies neatly back into the envelope, feeling the crisp edges beneath my fingertips. With each step away from the office, I kept that moment close, paper and purpose entwined. I would bring this victory home to them. I would show them that I was far from powerless. I sat at my kitchen table late that evening, the envelope of documents and spreadsheets spread before me like a secret map. The kitchen light cast a warm glow over every number, every row of projected income and expense. I traced the rental contracts for each unit I'd obtained, looking closely at rent amounts, lease terms, and occupancy details. Unit by unit, I annotated notes in the margins. Month-to-month tenant. Lease expires June. Needs HVAC update. These weren't just lines on paper anymore. They represented real people, real incomes, and real leverage. Next, I flipped through the minutes of the building's management board. Former meetings filled with maintenance proposals, landscaping costs, elevator inspection fees. They felt strangely personal. I underlined entries about rising rent and delayed repairs. With this information, I could evaluate where improvements might justify rent increases, or better yet, allow me to implement upgrades that tenants, including my daughter and son-in-law, would pay for willingly once they realized the value. My heart beat a little faster. I sensed the potential. Across the country, my daughter was living in one of these units, oblivious to how carefully I was preparing. I jotted down a mental list of steps. Finalize financing next week. Order appraisal. Request a title search. Coordinate with my advisor to ensure the closing remained secret until the last possible moment. They would wake one day to a new landlord. Phone calls followed, with Henry, my advisor, a title insurance agent, and the accountant. Each call advanced the plan. Deposit wire transfers authorized, inspections scheduled next week, closing to occur in 2 weeks. I felt a thrill in my chest, like a quiet promise being sealed. There was tension, of course. My savings were on the line. The loan would have me committed for years. But when I reminded myself why I was doing this, standing up for my dignity, reminding my family that I still had presence and means, it steadied the tremble in my hands. I was renovating more than a building. I was renovating boundaries. To keep everything confidential, I created a different email address, one that didn't include my name. I shuffled documents in a folder labeled investment proposal, not Acme Apartments. No one in the bank asked who I was buying it for. They saw the creditworthiness and the deposit. It felt surreal, a stealth operation in plain sight. Late one night, I sharpened a note 2 pencil and wrote, "Don't tell them until the deed is signed." I tucked the note into my coat pocket so I'd remember. The words burned in my mind. I didn't want their pity or their denial. I wanted the element of surprise. I wanted to show them that I had authority beyond their front door. Still, the emotional swirl was confusing. I had moments of doubt, wondering if I was being vengeful, if I should have gone a softer route, if I could really pull this off without telling my daughter. But each time that doubt rose, I remembered the morning I stood under the hallway light, suitcase in hand, choosing to walk out rather than endure one more moment of dismissal. That decision had been my anchor, and now, this path was my corrective course. Outside my window, spring's evening breeze carried the scent of lilac, washed by earlier rain. I pressed the page of rent-by-unit notes and closed the binder. I pictured them in their living room, unaware, laughing over dinner, oblivious to the storm gathering above their heads. When the appraisal report came, a day earlier than expected, I sliced open the envelope. The building's value was solid, slightly underestimated by local listings. That meant equity on day one, giving me flexibility. I leaned back in my chair, tasting the reality I would own this property soon. And with ownership came leverage. At sunset, I stepped out onto the porch with my tea, breathing in the humid warmth. I thought, they will wake and see me in full form, not broken, not helpless, not forgotten. I said it quietly, just to the sky. You thought I was powerless. You thought I had no say. Tomorrow you'll find out how wrong you were. The next morning, I signed the deposit forms, wired the final funds, and messaged Henry. We're live. He replied with a simple, "Congratulations, boss." I smiled at my reflection in the window. Yes, boss fit nicely. I folded the binder and stood, brushing past it to make coffee. No fanfare, no drama. I was executing a quiet revolution, measured in lease clauses and ledger lines. Fully prepared, I felt the nervous hum of anticipation. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with purpose. I had gathered the legal rights, financial backing, and emotional clarity needed to step forward. Walking into that plan was like stepping into my own backyard. I was home in purpose. The next stage, the signature stage, would reveal their surprise. But tonight, I rested in the satisfaction of preparation. After all, power is not just in owning property, it's in owning a direction, a decision, and a resolve to shape your world. And tomorrow, I would shape their world. I slid the purchase complete notification across the table to Henry, my advisor, as delay melted into disbelief. Across the document, in crisp type, were the words I'd hoped to see for weeks. Acquisition of Oak Street Apartments. Ownership transferred. My stomach fluttered. I reached for the nearby coffee cup, my hand steady only because my mind refused the tremor. "This is it," I said softly. "I no longer just live in their home. I own the building they live in." Henry smiled. He'd seen the look of steel in my eyes, but never doubted when I said, this wasn't about vengeance. It was about reclaiming dignity. We reviewed the memo's details quietly. Closing date, fund transfer confirmation, and legal authority granted. The balance was clear, the outcome undisputable. For 2 days I remained silent, letting the news settle like ripples in a still pond. I gathered what I needed: a small welcome to the new landlord memo for tenants, including routine updates and a brief introduction. It was polite, respectful, and neutral, just business. And then I scheduled the building's next board meeting, and on the invite list I made sure my daughter and her husband were there. They RSVP'd, no questions, confident they knew nothing of any transition. The evening of the meeting, I slipped into the building's meeting room a few minutes early, under the guise of a leaseholder getting an apartment update. I sat in the back row, feet planted firmly, heart steady in anticipation. One by one, tenants arrived. My daughter walked in with her husband. Carrying wine bottles to contribute, she gave me a quick nod. I returned a polite smile and sank into my seat. I watched the room buzz with small talk, leaks, lobby rugs, and whether the parking lot needed new lights. At the table's front sat Mr. Alvarez, the longtime property manager, and a few others. I looked around, all familiar faces, long-standing tenants who'd shared dinners, complaints, friendships. None expected tonight's reveal. As the manager droned on about coat closet extensions, I tapped the microphone, heads turned, curious. The manager paused. Ms. Patterson?" he asked, gesturing for me. I stood and walked forward, each step crisp, purposeful. My voice carried calmly. "Thank you for organizing this meeting. I'd like to introduce myself properly. My name is Marjorie Thompson, and as of last week, I am the legal owner of Oak Street Apartments." A hush fell across the room. I could feel the tension tilt like dominoes tipped. My daughter's eyebrows shot up. Her husband's jaw clenched, his eyes sharp, trying to mask fear. Tenants murmured uneasily. The manager cleared his throat. "I was unaware this was in progress," he began. I raised a hand. "This morning, a few of you received my welcome letter. I want to clarify tonight that with ownership comes responsibility, and with that, changes." I paused. A glance across the table caught my daughter's breath tightening. "I've reviewed the building's financials. Rentals haven't been adjusted in over 5 years, despite increased maintenance costs. Going forward, the rent for each unit will double, effective 60 days from today. A written addendum will be delivered to each household." A collective gasp rippled. Some tenants paled, others felt betrayed. My daughter half stood, her face marbled with disbelief. "Well, she even managed, "because this building and this community deserve to thrive," I replied evenly. "My family has been part of it. We've sacrificed, spent, kept it standing. My daughter and her husband have benefited without contributing. Now everyone will share in responsibility." I saw her face flush. She leaned forward. "Mom, that's insane. We can't afford." "But you will, or you will move," I said. "Choice rests with each household. But note, rent includes upkeep, parking, landscaping, real costs that have weighed heavily. It's the only way to preserve quality living." Silence returned. The room buzzed with whispers. I watched her husband lean in, nodding in agreement with me, or with the concept that cost had to match upkeep. Their eyes told a shifting story, entitlement giving way to reality. "We'll hold an open meeting in 2 weeks," I continued, "so any tenant can ask questions about rent breakdown, timelines, and if relocation assistance is available for those displaced. I aim for fairness, but not dependency." She opened her mouth. I held her gaze calmly. "We are done being asked to pay for their lifestyle with unpaid labor, unpaid living. We will all pay. We all own this community." With that, I sat back down. I felt the hum of electricity in the room. Not shock, not anger yet, but understanding that a new order had been established. My daughter stared at the annotated lease revisions I had prepared, her lips pressed thin. My heart pounded, not with triumph, but with quiet resolve. They had called me powerless, but now I held the title. The manager resumed. "Thank you, Ms. Thompson. We will vote on the proposed rent structure at the next session." The room stood in collective hush. I caught my daughter's eye. She looked like a child who had lost a spell to a stranger. I nodded once, gently, and gathered my papers. As I stood, I felt each step take me closer to justice and further from needing permission to live. The meeting adjourned. People filed out, subdued but no longer watching me. They recognized my position, and for the first time in a long while, I felt weight lift from my shoulders, because I had shown them I was not a guest in my life, not powerless, not dispensable, and absolutely still in control. I exited into the cool night air, feeling the wind in a different way, no longer rejection, but potential. I carried my papers carefully and my dignity, shadows long behind. I walked into the same meeting room, a week after announcing the rent increase, my folder under my arm and that quiet fire in my chest still burning. The room buzzed with cautious tension. Tenants whispered in low tones, and my daughter and son-in-law sat at the front row, faces pale like they'd seen a storm about to break. I didn't sit. I stood at the head of the table, the new landlord, not just their mother, and closed the folder with measured calm. "Thank you all for returning," I began. "Tonight, I'm here to finalize our amended lease addendum, which includes all the rent adjustments we announced last week. Before we begin, I'd like to address a clause I've added for my daughter and son-in-law specifically." I watched their faces tighten as murmurs ran through the room. She swallowed. He shifted uncomfortably. I held their gaze. Under Massachusetts law, landlords may include clauses for caretaker services when family resides on property. Given my age and medical needs, I am invoking that right. I laid the addendum on the table. This clause requires a minimum of 5 hours per week of assistance, simple household tasks, errands, companionship, whatever services I require. You may elect to fulfill that obligation or pay an additional monthly fee of $200. This is not optional. A stunned hush filled the room. She looked at her husband, appalled. He rubbed his forehead. "You can't do that," she blurted. "That's extortion." "No," I interrupted softly. "That's responsibility. You refused to offer me a home. Now you're choosing to support me, fairly or pay for care. Either way, I am not asking for charity. I am exercising a legal right." Tension clenched the room like a vice. Tenants craned their necks, some whispering among themselves. I could feel the moral shift, empathy for the quiet, wronged grandmother shining through curiosity. "This town is filled with condos and landlords who treat caretaking as business," I continued. "I'm applying the same standard, settled law, equal human expectations." She opened her mouth, then closed it. He leaned forward, voice low. What if it's multiple hours? What explanation do we need to give?" "You document hours in a simple logbook. You make sure I stay fed, safe, and supported. The alternative is the fee. That will be added to your rent monthly. I will show receipts." That's it. References were exchanged. I affirmed, "I am serious. These obligations are direct consequences of your decision. There is no more room for unpaid heartstrings. Legally, morally, I'm owed better than emptiness." They glanced at each other, their posture slumping as resignation crept in. Tenants murmured. I waited. Silence lingered, heavy. Finally she cleared her throat. We'll do it. We'll sign." I nodded. I pulled each of them forward gently, her hand trembling as she took the pen. "Remember," I said quietly, though the words echoed, "this isn't punishment. It's accountability. You chose to treat me as an inconvenience. Now, you're choosing how you will remedy that." I handed them copies. On each sheet, a clear clause explained their options: care or cash. Then I addressed the room. "Each tenant has until next week to accept the new lease terms with rent adjustments. If you disagree, you must give notice." I let the expectation settle. Once signed, the rent and obligations will be enforceable. That's fair. That's just. Someone in the back cleared their throat. "We appreciate clarity, Ms. Thompson." Another tenant nodded. The new landlord stood quietly, dignity intact. I closed my folder, feeling the room shift. My daughter met my eye, her own shining with something like shame, but tempered with acceptance. She didn't smile, but it wasn't hostility anymore. I stood straight, voice firm. In this building, my building, there is no longer a false sense of family entitlement. We now all know what being a tenant means and what it doesn't. If this arrangement offends your expectations, the exit is simple. Pay the fee, do the hours, or leave. That is the respect I command. I saw several tenants straighten, a newfound respect in their eyes. Some scribbled into their notes, readying for signatures. The meeting lifted, but the atmosphere felt cleaner, like after a storm rinses away grime. When we adjourned, I walked out with grace. Outside, my daughter slipped her arm around my shoulder quietly and said, "I'm sorry, Mom." I looked ahead, calm. "Then let's get this signed." I paused at the door, feeling the weight of authority settle at my feet. I'd sent the message. Ownership meant more than rent, it meant respect. Justice had been served, not with chaos, but with clarity, clause by clause. As I stepped onto the steps, the rain had stopped. Clouds parted. I squeezed the folder, smiled quietly to the sky, and knew I had reclaimed what had been taken. They thought property ownership couldn't protect me. I made them prove they were willing to treat me as a person, not just a provider. And in doing so, I showed them that sometimes the rent is more than money. It's dignity, depending on us all. I descended the stairs like a woman who had reset the balance of her life and left behind a lesson money can't buy, in a building that, for the first time, felt like justice. I stepped into the lobby later that evening, heading back to my apartment after that intense board meeting. But something made me stop in the hallway, just outside theirs. I heard voices, quiet at first, then growing. "Did you catch what she said?" one tenant whispered to another. "She's right," another replied. "I've been living here 10 years and never felt heard." A few doors down, I heard a soft sniffle followed by, "All that strength, and she's right. Respect is worth more than discounted rent." The murmurs spread like wildfire, tenants exchanging glances, holding back applause until the moment felt right. Then the soft rustle of clapping began, first a few hands, then more, crescendoing into a steady round of acknowledgement. I watched from the doorway as neighbors I barely knew began to gather. Some wiped tears from their cheeks. One woman murmured, "I thought I was alone," and another whispered, "I'm so glad she stood up." Inside their apartment, I could see through the glass door. My daughter stood by the table, her eyes red but not with resentment. She looked at me, tears in her gaze, and I felt a familiar ache bloom in my chest. I crossed the threshold. My daughter's husband stood near her silently. He said nothing, but I saw the tension leave his shoulders as understanding dawned. I held the plate of birthday cake I had brought earlier. The edge of the candlelight flickered across the frosting. I leaned close to my daughter and whispered, voice firm but soft, "You are still my daughter." She blinked, lips trembling, tears bright. I reached across the small coffee table and took her hand, warm and real. She pressed back. Tenants who had gathered at their doors, those whose lives I now help oversee, stood close enough to hear. They were silent witnesses, their support unwavering. My daughter looked at me, the room calm but full. She took a steadying breath and reached toward the cake. Together, with tenants as audience, we relit the birthday candle, and she blew it out. It was quiet but not empty. It was full of possibility. In that soft glow, I felt something shift. Years of wrongs met with the light of presence, accountability, and love. My daughter's voice broke the hush. "Mom? Thank you." Her words weren't grand, but they carried weight. I nodded. "Happy birthday, sweetheart." She smiled, finally, easily, like the first breath after a long storm. Around us, the soft hum of voices, small nods, and the unspoken promise of community solidarity filled the hallway. For the first time since being cast away, I felt rooted, not just by lease or ownership, but by respect and recognition. And there, in that chorus of shared dignity, I realized that sometimes a building's tenants can become a family, and sometimes that family can redefine what a home really means. And as we all melted back into our spaces, some to their apartments, others to the night air, I carried that warmth with me, because I had reclaimed more than residence. I had reclaimed my name. Together we had witnessed a mother's power to transform rejection into belonging, brick by brick, heart by heart. End of SHS it. If you've ever been told you were too old to matter, too quiet to be heard, too gentle to stand strong, remember this. Sometimes the softest voice, the steady hand, the woman in the corner quietly observing it all, is the one holding the deeds to every assumption, every privilege, every place they thought they owned. And when respect is denied, when dismissal becomes routine, you don't wait for someone else's approval. You rewrite the rules on your own terms. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for joining me on this journey, this walk through the shadows of rejection, the halls of betrayal, and finally into the bright room of reclaimed dignity. If this story stirred something inside you, if it reminded you of a woman you love or the woman you yourself have become, then you've seen why these stories matter. Here on Grandma True Stories, we don't just listen, we witness. We feel each plate pushed aside, every suitcase packed, each bill signed, every quiet determination. We understand the invisible hours of sacrifice, the meals served without thanks, the boxes of memories tucked away while others found comfort. And we honor what replaces that comfort, self-respect earned through truth. It's easy to say, she must be so angry. But that's not the point. Justice isn't bitter. Justice isn't spiteful. It's necessary. It's the balance restored after the weight of injustice has been borne. When respect is denied, when your presence is reduced to something optional, you don't retreat. You emerge in full color, with the keys in your hand and the floor beneath your feet. In this space, you've heard story after story. Women who were told they were too old, too sick, too dependent, too large in spirit to deserve space. And each time, they stood. They signed the deed, took the stand, gathered the documents, boarded the plane, held the door open. They didn't just refuse to disappear, they created a stage for their return. If this story resonates, if it gives you goosebumps or tears or a gentle ache of recognition, please subscribe to Grandma True Stories. It isn't just a channel, it's a community. A gathering place for voices that were once forgotten, but not anymore. You'll find tales of quiet revenge, dignified defiance, dismantled expectations, and doors unlocked, not for others, but for themselves. Subscribe now. Join the women who dared to say, "No more waiting," the women who renamed their lives, the women who carved dignity from silence and drew lines in their own names, signed and sealed them. Because remember, silence isn't weakness, it's the hush before the world shifts. And justice? It doesn't come with a timeline. It comes with conviction, with intention, with the understanding that sometimes revenge isn't about payback. That's petty. True revenge, the kind that builds, is about living life fully, unapologetically, on your own terms. Your story matters. Their story matters. And mine? Well, mine is still living and still unfolding one strong day at a time. Subscribe to Grandma True Stories, where every story is a testament, every voice unforgettable, and every grandmother a quiet architect of her own destiny. Revenge has no expiration date, and so our stories continue, loud in their truth, gentle in their power, enduring in their message. Thank you for being here.